So yeah, my name is Daryl Abney. I'm a 3D character artist, 3D artist. I currently work for Leica. It's in Portland, Oregon. So Leica's known for doing stop motion. Where you move a little puppet one frame at a time, take a picture, move it. But we also have a lot of computer generated characters and sets. So that's what I do. I work in the visual effects department on a movie called Wildwood. And yeah, I'm also an advanced ZBrush instructor for a school in Utah. It's called Anim School. You should check them out. They also have it online. So I teach online advanced ZBrush. Um, I enjoy teaching. I might even have a couple students in here because I told them about it. Yeah, so I've been working as a 3D artist since 2005. That's when I got my first job. And I'll talk to you guys a little bit about it, my story, and hopefully some of that will help you. Um, Even though it was a long time ago, I still think some of the stuff still applies, to today. But yeah, just a little bit more about me. Previous to Leica, I worked for Industrial Light and Magic in Vancouver, BC, up in Canada. First movie I worked on there was Valerian. So we built a bunch of aliens for this big alien market. I worked on Star Wars Last Jedi. It's a lot of fun. Got to build a lot of stuff. I'll talk to you about that a little bit. I worked a little bit on Kong Skull Island. That was kind of like overtime, like helping something called shot sculpting. And I also worked on Aquaman for a while. So yeah, before that, I worked at Sony ImageWorks on Angry Birds. So I do stylized stuff too. So I do VFX and stylized and animation. Angry Birds, Hotel Transylvania 2, Alice in Wonderland 2, and Suicide Squad. That was at Sony, also in Vancouver. Other projects I've worked on include Star Trek Into Darkness. That was at a company called Pixamondo in Santa Monica, LA. I worked on Harry Potter and Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2, and Narnia 3. That was at MPC London. And I worked on Paranorman at Leica. So I worked at Leica a while ago, and then I left, and then I came back. So, also worked 4 years at PlayStation making an NBA basketball game, and we did a comedy bowling game called High Velocity Bowling. Before I worked as a 3D artist, I went to school for special effects, so special effects makeup. My first job out of college, I was clay sculpting and airbrushing animatronic animals for theme parks. Okay, because I went to the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, which is no longer around. They've shut down. It's kind of sad, but I graduated with a degree in industrial design technology, which is a mixture of product design and special makeup effects. So, yeah, again, thanks for joining. I'm going to show some pictures. I'm actually going to blast out all my links. You don't have to click on them now. You can save them for later. But yeah, it's first is my website, then is my Instagram. Then there's my Gumroad, which I have some tutorials. Also sell some 3D models on here. This robot tutorial, shameless plug, but it's about 20 hours long. So there's a lot of information, hard surface modeling. And then I have a gun tutorial modeling, which is less time. Then I got my ArtStation, just because it's kind of universal to have an ArtStation. I don't update as much as I should, as much as my website, but yeah. So those are my links. Let me show you some pictures, pretty pictures, right? So probably the most famous thing I worked on was I did the 3D model of the Porgs for Last Jedi. Anytime I show this film stuff, like keep in mind there's an army of people, right? So I can't take credit for this whole thing. Like someone else did the fur, my buddy Brian. My buddy Ricardo did the texturing. A guy named Neil did the look dev. There's a bunch of animators stuff. I gotta, give credit where credit's due. Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. I worked on the ATST, the BB-8 drives. I modeled and textured the Captain Phasma. So there's a clean version and a damaged version. So that was a lot of work. Textured the transport ships. Did some concept design for American Horror Story. These are some, some concept explorations. So I do some concept too, in addition to production modeling. Right now I work as a production modeler. Sculpted the big Tylosaur that Ocean Master rides in Aquaman. That's the villain, the nemesis of Aquaman. So that was a lot of fun to make. It's basically like a dinosaur, It was just something I did for fun. That it got on the cover of the 3D World magazine. Got up there, that was a lot of fun. This is for the robot tutorial. And I should mention this was sometimes I work with buddies, and collaborate. So this was textured by my friend Brad DeCaution, really good texture painter. Uh, did a likeness sculpt of my grandfather. This is a likeness of my niece, which I'm going to show you guys a little bit about this if I have time, like how, project exploration, stuff like that. That was the early version before I posed her. Did a collectible sculpture. This is Chief Osceola and his horse Renegade. And then this is a 3D print that's painted. So I like 3D printing. So this is, just a clown I designed. He's over there. You probably can't see it's a little dot, but yeah, a little printer in my garage. Something I painted. Something I did. I did this in my first class at anim school. Big giant. This is the concept. Yeah, bunch of stuff. We don't have a lot of time, so this is kind of a work in progress. It's like a witch I'm working on, inspired by Evil Dead and horror movies and stuff like that. Um, she's supposed to be blue, so I'm gonna make her blue. That's something I painted Procreate. It's on the iPad. And then this is a zombie I sculpted for Paranorman. I didn't do the hands, but I did the torso and the head and the brains. That was a lot of fun. So you can tell I like horror stuff and creepy stuff. Yeah. We will have a questions at the end, but yeah, let me get to it. Okay. So the old job searching question. So maybe I'll put some pretty pictures up just to have something on the screen here. So you have something to look at. Yeah. So first of all, you're already on the right track by being here and being curious about the job searching process. When preparing for this talk, I thought a lot about the question, and I'm sure many of you have the question, how do I get a job as a 3D artist? Totally valid question, and it's one that has a variety of answers. I'll admit it's a bit of a daunting subject for me to take on. I think a lot of my buddies wouldn't even want to deal with this, but here goes. I'll try my best. So, first of all, I don't believe there's one silver bullet or cheat code to getting a 3D art job. But I do think there's some habits and behaviors that will help you to put you in a better position to successfully land that first job. Getting your foot in the door in the entertainment business is not easy. Even in a great job market is not easy, and in a slow job market is really not easy. So yeah, don't just listen to me. Research what other experienced people advise as far as job searching. Form your own opinion. Form your own game plan. Right. Um, we each have our own path. I'll tell you about my path, which may not apply 100% today because I got hired in 2005. It's 20 years ago. But I think many parts of my story still apply. So yeah, I'm going to start by using an analogy. So if you want to get in better shape, you'd probably start eating healthier. You start a workout routine, right? However, not every workout routine works the same for everyone. Different people are motivated different ways. They'd respond to different fitness routines. And the same goes for making art and finding a career as an artist. Here's a routine I recommend that may or may not work for you. So we all know the main steps finding a job is to have a strong portfolio, right? You got to have a portfolio. Even if you know you have some great connections at a studio, you won't get hired unless you have a portfolio. Maybe like 30 years ago you could have if you knew somebody, but now you have to have a portfolio. I know some of you probably already have a portfolio by this point because I know a lot of you have kind of gone through school or you're towards the end of school. So it'll be up to you to choose what piece you're going to add next because you're always going to be updating your portfolio. I'm still updating mine, right? I have some advice on what to put in your portfolio, but again, we all have our own path. So for example, I would say don't only have one thing in your portfolio. Like don't only have robots. Um, but when I say that, keep in mind, I have known someone who got hired that just had robots. So there's always exception to the rule. I think if your stuff's exceptional, you can kind of break the rules a little bit in that category. Does that make sense? So my career has mainly been focused on making 3D characters for film and games. So a lot of my advice is going to be towards characters. I also have done stats and environments, I did some sets on Star Trek and Alice in Wonderland, and I've done a bunch of sets too. But my specialty is characters. So for a 3D character artist portfolio, I would break your portfolio down into two versions. So right, there's the version you make in an ideal world when you have lots of time, and then there's the what I call the 1.0 version that's finished but maybe not perfect. But you can always build on this and add to it later. Because as we all know, your portfolio is never actually finished. But at some point, you got to send it out there, right? So you have to get a version good enough to send out into the world. So me myself, I haven't updated my reel in a while. I'm in the industry already, so I don't have to update it every year, But I'm due for an update. It's been a while, so I'm kind of at that 1.0 right now for myself. Like I'd love to do more, but I think, yeah. And it's not that I'm looking, but I like to have peace of mind of knowing my reels kind of there, just in case. You never know. Um, if you're targeting a stylized studio like DreamWorks or Illumination, Pixar, Disney, Leica, etc., ideally, I want to see like 3 to 5 stylized characters. You don't need 20, and you don't want to just have one or two, right? Um, some with costume, if some without. Some of your characters can be highly stylized and streamlined, meaning just super stylized, like not crazy human anatomy. Some of them. But I think at least one of them should have some human anatomy. Doesn't have to be for real, but just some muscle definition, some bony landmarks, like some cheekbones, some proper skull structure. Because it's good to have, because animals are good to have too, but definitely have some humans, because that's what most of the work is, making humans. When you get on these shows, or I'm talking a lot about film, but you could apply what I'm saying to games as well. Uh, so yeah, I'm just kind of telling you my my little window of the world, right? Like if you were talking to an environment artist, you probably hear a whole different. Some of it will be similar, but some different. So yeah, so these days you're expected to know how to texture too. So don't just have gray models. Back in my day, you could just have gray, and they could be in the boring T pose. That was back in the day, to be in this T. But now you actually want to have it. You don't have to have all of them textured, but you don't want them all gray, right? But you do need them in a pose, right? Maybe if you have 5 models and one's in kind of a neutral, if it's a really nice neutral, that would fly. But like, definitely don't just have a stiff. You want to picture however your character's personality is. So if it's a scared character, you'd want to put it in like a kind of a scared pose, like that, how you would see them at like that key moment in the movie, right? So that's the main idea. Doesn't have to be a crazy, like twisty, dramatic pose, but just something it's going to give it some life, right? Also, you need to light your stuff really nice, right? It's kind of like if you buy something in a nice package versus a not nice package. You're going to pick up the nice package, right? So get a nice light setup together. There's a lot of them out there. I mean, you could almost even, depending on what program you're using, download one if you really. But I think it's better to learn how to do lighting. But there's also Keyshot, which makes it pretty easy too. I personally use Maya and Arnold, but we'll get into software in a little bit. Yeah, I already mentioned posing. I highly recommend you incorporate some type of hard surface modeling into your portfolio. So even if you're like, hey, I'm a character artist, I'm an organic artist, you're still gonna be called to do hard surface sometimes. So it could just be, a character's holding a prop, like some kind of weapon, or it could be they have some kind of hard surface backpack. Maybe they have some kind of jetpack on their back, or there's some kind of robot dog assistant. Just if you can mix hard surface in, it's gonna really elevate your stuff in with your organic. So that brings me to the topic of choosing your concept art. So your 3D modeling work will only be as good as the concept art you start from, right? If you pick a bad concept, you could do a great model, but it's not gonna, you're not setting yourself up. So choose an interesting concept. If you have really strong 2D skills, like really strong, then you can do your own concept, draw it and do it. Most 3D artists are not there. So in that case, if you're doubting, then I would use a talented concept artist concept to do your 3D model. And I'm talking about making a modeling reel, right? I'm not saying give up on doing your own concepts. I definitely think you should keep that skill growing, and I do it too. But like, if you're just trying to get A to B as fast as you can, the modeling reel, use a really good concept from a strong concept artist. So hopefully that makes sense. I don't recommend using AI concept. Let's support humans. AI is a whole other topic. Um, it's kind of hard sometimes on Google to find art. Some of my students, when they're looking at concepts, they have trouble finding them. So you can go to the if you click the Google Images Advanced search, there's keywords you can type that you don't want. Like, you could type all those AI keywords like mid journey and stable diffusion and AI, and it'll kind of weed out some of it from Google Images search, but it's not perfect. So I would just say go to the Instagram of like the concept artist you like, or the art station. So yeah, so far I've been giving advice for stylized studios, right? If that's not your jam and you're more into realistic, uh, a realistic film or a realistic game, I don't know, like a Call of Duty or an Avengers kind of VFX, realistic. Um, this advice still applies, except you would just have more realistic anatomy. You'd have more detail, right? I mean, there's the perfect world where you have everything. You got a dog, you got a human, you got a robot, right? But there's only so much time in the day, right? So we're trying to streamline this. 3 to 5 good models. One can be a prop. Maybe you got 3 characters. I think if they're really good, you can get hired with 3 characters. If you just had heads, I don't recommend this, but if they're a really, really high level, you could get hired just with heads. But again, most jobs you're not just making heads though, so uh, you should have full body. Uh, I got to watch myself on my advice, right? Because I don't want someone to take it and run with it, right? So I kind of just got to elaborate on my advice. So yeah, I would say with the VFX stuff, it's just going to be more detailed. Like, the clothing might have like crazy amounts of detail and weaving and straps, and there might be some kind of scales all over your character. Scales are hard, but if you could have one with a lot of detail, VFX type stuff, they like to see face shapes or blend shapes, so like facial expressions. So if you could do like 2 or 3, a smile, an angry, that's going to help you too. If you took your character and you did a few shapes, I think that's going to set you apart. Face shapes. Um, I would avoid, if we're talking the concept art, avoid having too much fan art. So like um, Spider-Man or Iron Man, people have seen all this before. Like, they want to see something they haven't seen before, right? So I recommend something, a really cool concept that appeals to you, that's not something that people have seen before, right? Because they don't want to see a watered down version of Spider-Man. It's not going to help you. So watch out with fan art. I'm not saying you can't do fan art on your own. Like, I do a couple of those on my own, but that's like, my portfolio is not built up of that. You know what I'm saying? I think there's something inside of us that when we see something, sometimes we just want to make it our own version, and I think that's normal. You know, just don't make your whole portfolio that. Um, yeah. So that was a lot of portfolio talk. So once you have a kick-ass portfolio, it's almost time to send it out into the world. But wait, you need a resume or CV. Like, in the US, we call it resume. Keep your resume simple. Don't cover it with a bunch of images. It looks like you're kind of trying to make up for something. Just keep it simple, clean. Um, don't be super humble. Like, make yourself look good, but in an honest way. Like, it's the resume is marketing. You want to sell yourself. Don't lie, but remember, resume is marketing. So you want to paint yourself in the best possible light. List the software and your skills. Have a link to your website and your contact information at the top. At least in the US, that's the standard. Just don't forget that contact information. It sounds obvious, but yeah. Um, I'm mostly familiar with US resumes. Again, like, it might be different in other countries, so I got to watch out because you guys are very international, which is cool. Um, so yeah, so you got the portfolio. you've got the resume. Demo reel is also very standard to have. So a 2 to 3 minute demo reel showing your models turning, right? So um, sometimes I have gotten jobs just with still images, but that not my first job. Um, if an art director can see your work spinning in full 3D, that's going to show that you understand 3D. That you can not just fake it from one angle and then it's like broken in the back. That your model actually works in full 3D. Um, yeah. So once you have a demo reel, a website, still images, I would make an art station again. Like I use the free one. You can pay. I think that gets you more visibility. Um, maybe during like while you're searching, you pay for a little bit, and then when you get your first job, you turn the pay off. It's up to you. I use the free one. So yeah, ArtStation, and then LinkedIn. Pros and cons of LinkedIn. It's kind of a social media thing, but I think it's worth having for sure because you can follow companies there. You can add recruiters. It has job searching. So once you've done all that, um, you're pretty much ready to go, right? So where can you find jobs? You can search LinkedIn jobs. There's ArtStation has some jobs. Indeed.com is a big one. Just put keywords in. Um, yeah, so I would say I can be susceptible to this as well, right? But try not to get too down on yourself or overwhelmed when looking at other people's art online or social media. I have days where I'm inspired and other days where I feel behind. When you go to ArtStation and you see that landing page, right? Remember, you're comparing yourself to the entire world at that point, right? So to get hired as an artist, your art doesn't have to be better than the 20-year veteran or the 10-year veteran, um, but it does need to be as good as someone working in entry level in the industry, right? So you don't have to beat the best person in the world to get the job, but it has to be a certain level. So just keep that in mind. If you can somehow, this is a little bit harder to do, but if you can somehow find like the art of people that just got hired, you kind of see the bar, that you need to hit. Hopefully your school is kind of helping you with that. Yeah, so you've got all that stuff, right? I also think going to conventions is big, right? So SIGGRAPH is a big computer graphics convention. They have a job fair. It's been years, but I asked some coworkers of mine who are much younger than me that I was like, how did you get hired? And one of them had an interview at SIGGRAPH. Um, and there's also one called Lightbox. I've never been to Lightbox. Maybe some of you have, but I think they have a career fair too. So it's just a good way to like physically meet people, instead of the internet where you never know if your resume is just rejected by an AI bot or something, right? Um, Speaking of, I think these days the HR departments and all that, they are using a lot of the keywords to filter out your resume, right? So you may have to target per job your resume and build it with certain keywords that match the job description, assuming that you do match the job description. Like I think that's a pretty safe bet. You don't want to overdo it and like copy paste the job description. Because most likely as an entry level, you're not going to have all those skills. Also another thing, and I kind of rant when I talk to, but I just fire off whatever's on my mind. A lot of the job postings can be overwhelming because they're like, you must know this and programming and this thing and that. A lot of times they know they're not going to get someone who knows all that, right? If you meet the standards, like the software and you have the art skills, but you don't. If it says like nice to have on there, you might get hired without knowing that, right? They're always really ambitious. They want it all. um, so keep that in mind. Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about, yeah, for SIGGRAPH, you might have to book ahead of time. I can't really remember. Again, it's been years. Um, I actually drove up to SIGGRAPH when it was in Canada, and this was back in the day before like GPS was on your phone. I had one of those old GPS on my car, and it stopped working when I crossed the border. So when I got into Canada, I didn't have GPS anymore, and I was like, no. And I had to like stop at a pharmacy, and they were really nice, and they printed me out a map and everything. And I got to SIGGRAPH late. I missed my interview. Yeah, don't be like me. But these days, GPS are much better. Okay, so let's talk about the job market. Yeah. So 3 years ago, you probably knew, unless you've been kind of hiding under a rock, the job market was booming, right? It was what they had a name for it, like the Great Resignation, 3 or 4 years ago. Everyone was hiring; they were over hiring. Um, Lots of jobs. Everyone was kind of jumping. Not everyone, but there's a lot of people jumping ship, changing jobs. Right now is definitely more of a rainy season, right? I would call that. In fact, this might be one of the slowest times I've ever seen it. I have to be honest about that. So I was around 2008 when there was the housing crash, right? That was pretty bad too. Um, I don't know if this is any worse than that or any better, but it's definitely slow right now. So it wouldn't be fair for me to just not even mention that, right? I'm not gonna say it's impossible. In fact, a lot of my recent students have found jobs. You know, um, so I always get excited. I don't keep track of all of them and see which ones got jobs, but a lot of times I'll see on LinkedIn like, oh yeah, this guy's working, and I also track my friends. So all my friends are working except maybe one. So that's just my personal barometer, and there's not much science behind that. But um, yeah, the industry definitely has seasons, and we're slow compared to a few years ago. Before there were the writer strikes, and there was this AI, and there was a slowdown of the economy. Um, I do not think the AI is another thing, that's not fun to talk about, but it needs to be talked about. It hasn't really hit me that much as a 3D modeler. I know there are apps now where you drop a picture in and it spits out a model, and I think that's going to be more and more common. But for years we've had these websites where you download a model, right? And there's still been modelers around. So um, I know it's affected concept artists a lot, but I'm also hearing that it was kind of a it was a big push for that, and then it's kind of being pushed back a little, like because it's not giving them what they want exactly. Like you still need people for now. I can't speak about in the future, and that's not just an artist problem, right? This is writers and musicians. This. Um, but yeah, so that's the state of things now. I am not currently AI is not taking my job yet, so I just know to mention that. Um, One thing we don't know, for sure, is we don't know what's going to happen. So there's a lot of people that doom and gloom, and maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. I don't know. So yeah, back to my job search story. So some people graduate college and land a good job right away. This is not the case for me. So as far as 3D art goes, it took me over 2 years trying to get my first 3D art job. Like once I started applying. Um, Now I need to go back a little further. So I actually went to school, like I said, for special effects. So when I was in school, I had like two 3D Max classes. I didn't really, ironically, didn't think I would be a 3D artist one day. I was like, I was more into the hands-on stuff. This is a 97 to 99. Yes, I know I'm old. Um, so yeah, I got out of school and I went to Florida and I worked for a couple of years after school and in the fabrication industry. So I was a traditional sculptor and painter for the Rainforest Cafe restaurant. That's the restaurant with all the animals. You go in and there's like an elephant and animatronic alligator. And, that was fun. So yeah, it was a lot of hands-on stuff. I also worked as a costume and makeup artist at Universal Studios Florida. It was all in Orlando, and I worked as a scenic painter for Walt Disney World. So I had this hands-on experience, but even with that, it didn't get me right into 3D, right? So after I did a few years in Florida, I moved to LA because I wanted to get into film and VFX. Some people say turn to the dark side, like go away from traditional to digital. Um, I just did it because I wanted to have more opportunities, you know, I saw more opportunity with the digital art at that time, and I still do. So yeah, after graduating and going to Florida, I moved to LA in 2003 with no job. I did have a roommate. He went out before me, and I guess you could say, this is my leap of faith moment. I didn't have a huge savings. I had a roommate in a one-bedroom apartment and in LA, Marina Del Rey, LA. My first job, I delivered pizzas for a couple months. So I delivered to Kobe Bryant twice. He's very serious. Yeah. And then I worked as a game tester for Electronic Arts. That was pretty cool. Um, and then I did Photoshop graphics at a DVD company. So this whole time I was kind of teaching myself 3D, and I did take an intro to Maya at Noman, which is in Hollywood. So yeah, that gave me a little jump start. But yeah, that whole time I was applying, probably applied to like 20 places. My buddy Steve, my good buddy Steve, gave me this idea. He said you should try contacting the 3D scanning company, right? Um, it's a lot easier to get in a small place. There are exceptions to the rule, but I know it's not sexy. Like everyone wants like Disney or ILM. You haven't failed if you don't start there. You can start somewhere small and work your way up, right? Um, so my buddy Steve was like, "Why don't you just call?" And I know they tell you don't call. So I cold called the 3D scanning company called Itronics. They're not around anymore, but there was this magazine called Cinefex where you look at like special effects of film. They were always on the back of Cinefex for a while. So I cold called them and I said, "Do you need an intern?" And I wasn't even at school at the time, but so they hired me as an intern for a week, and I was working for a week, not getting paid. Um, I don't recommend doing unpaid, but I'm telling you my story. So after a week, I did a really good job. I learned their scan software, and I was putting together scans and processing scans. After a week, they hired me. So that was 2005. That was my first big foot in the door moment. Was not a perfect job. There is no perfect job. Um, but it allowed me to learn. And it's like 6 months later, I jumped to a place called Threshold. It's another small studio. Um, and I was at Threshold 6 months, and then I landed a job making 3D characters at Sony PlayStation in San Diego. So that's kind of my start in digital. So it was like two little jumps, and then Sony, and I really like Sony, so I stayed there for 4 years. I liked San Diego too. Um, Yeah, so I landed my first 3D modeler job at Itronics after applying for probably 20 or 30 jobs, right? So that's my story. I mean, it might take people less, might take people longer. Yeah, we all have our own path, a different amount of luck. I don't think it's all about luck, though. It's about putting yourself in a position to have success. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Um, I heard that on that show Wednesday the other day, but it's a good quote. Uh, Being persistent, you have to be a little bit stubborn. People are not going to believe in you. Some people might be. Some people will be like, "Ah, don't do that." Um, it's a hard industry to get in and stay in too. So you have to really want it, and maybe you find out it's not for you. Maybe if you want to do something that's nurses are needed more than anywhere, at least in the U.S. So um, not trying to scare anyone. I'm just saying you have to be pretty strong, pretty thick skinned, and persistent to get in. It's not one of these. Oh, I went to school, so I'm going to get a job now. Nah, you got to work for it. Um, Anything worth doing is hard, typically. So yeah, so I had to move to LA. Right, this is a while ago. These days with remote work, maybe you're not going to have to move. I don't know. There's all these labor laws, and so sometimes I know, like with certain companies, you have to live in certain states. They won't hire you. I'm talking about US, right? Um, so it could get tricky. I know Canada, they like you to move there. This is the tax break thing. That's another fun thing to talk about. AI tax breaks. It's a big part of what's happening in VFX. Like the companies in Canada, not just Canada, but the citizens are paying taxes that are paying people's salaries to like incentivize the work to get up there. So, but to get the work, a lot of times people have to physically live in Canada, right? So when I lived in Vancouver, I had to move there because the tax breaks were paying like part of my salary. I don't know how much. I think it was like 50%, maybe more. Um, And then that kind of makes it hard for LA to compete, which is where I got my start, because they can't compete with another place paying 60%. It's a whole other ball of life that I can't get into in this speech, but at least a lot of you probably know, but if you don't, then now you can research. So yeah, my long story short, perhaps you won't have to move with remote. Um, you could start as remote. There are pros and cons to being remote. That's another topic. Damn, it's already 10:06. So yeah, so for me, I think the pros outweigh the cons, but everyone's a difference. Some people need that socialization. I try to get out and I do like workouts and basketball and try to get out and see people. Just stay in my house all day. Um, so yeah, that's it for the career part. Congrats, you made it this far. Let's move on to the second part of my speech. We'll talk about, this is the fun part. Okay, I talk about artistic motivation and productivity. So there's a lot of tutorials out there that go over software, and so I didn't want to do another one of those. This is more like stuff that some of it, some of it's in the back of your mind that you kind of know, common sense, but then some of it's like, oh, okay, maybe I should try that. So I just thought I would take all this stuff and put it in one spot, and I use it myself, right? And I have to remind myself sometimes. So these are some things I've learned from others and some things I've discovered myself. I love when I learn a new creative tip or productivity tip. I try to write it down immediately. I collect them like little gold nuggets. Many of these tips are targeted towards making your own personal art, but of course you can make some of these tips work for your art job or your art career. Being successful 3D artist isn't just about knowing the latest software and tools. It's also a mental game. We don't all do art the same way. Some of us work better under pressure. Some of us need that like deadline to get it done. Some of us work better at night. Some of us work better in the morning. I say know yourself, find what works for you, and then pour gasoline on that fire. Like, don't force yourself to work a way you don't want to work. For example, if you're more creative at night, do your tedious tasks early in the day and save your creative tasks for the evening. As far as creativity goes, don't sit around and wait to feel inspired. Just get started, right? You're not always if you sit around and wait, you're never gonna get anything done. If you're a digital artist, I say just sit your ass down in the chair and make that first paint stroke or your first sculpting stroke, whatever. Sometimes it helps me to start with the low hanging fruit types of tasks, or the easy tasks, and then you build momentum. Like if you're not feeling it, start with the easy thing, and maybe it's just renaming stuff. Like it could be anything. Tell yourself, this is one I use a lot. Tell yourself, I will work undisturbed on my project for 10 minutes. And once you sit down and you do it, 10 minutes is easily going to turn into 30 or an hour, right? That being said, you can't always force it. You do need to take breaks if you hit a wall. So I'll take a break. I'll go on a walk if I hit a wall. And then if I have a problem that I just can't figure out, I'll take a walk. Or some of my best ideas come when I'm on a walk or I'm in the shower. Like, some people say to-do lists don't work. I disagree. I like the feeling of accomplishment when I check things off my list. Maybe it's something I write like in a Google Doc. I do a lot of Google Docs. Maybe it's something to just put on a Post-it note. I can go crazy with the Post-it notes. So flow state. So I have some tips for getting in the flow state. The flow state is when we are hyper-focused and we can really crank out some art. Sometimes it feels effortless, right? Because you're in the zone. Athletes can get into this. Yeah, artists can too. So flow state tips and focus tips pretty much go hand in hand. So to get in the flow state, I often play music. Music with no lyrics, right? Or I listen to a podcast, but I feel like music with no lyrics is better. Movie soundtracks are pretty good. Sometimes I listen to binaural beats. I know some people watch movies while they work, but I typically get distracted if there's video going. If I'm doing a low hanging fruit, I might have a video going or a podcast or learn something on YouTube while I'm working. But I really need to focus. It's music with no lyrics, sometimes no music at all, right? This one's obvious. Get your phone out of sight. right? And put it on silence and don't have it near you. That's like the ultimate distraction. Um, if you have two monitors like me, turn one monitor off. I know like you might have the chat over on one. If I really need to focus, I just have one monitor. Focus. Yeah. So let's talk about creativity. So I believe creativity comes when you're in a state of play, uh, when you're having fun, not when you're forcing it. So don't be too hard on yourself when you start a new art project, and don't expect perfection from the start. Sometimes when I start a new sketch, I tell myself this is a throwaway sketch. And I swear a lot of times those turn into be my most creative because I'm not putting that pressure on myself to be perfect. Um, as far as personal art goes, lately I prefer to draw on my couch on my iPad with Procreate. So speaking of couch, like I work all day, and then I also do personal art at home. So I'm kind of talking about like after work when I'm on the couch, family time. I'm not always on my iPad, but it's a good time to well, if you got TV going and you can do some art, some creativity. So I can't just be in my office on my computer all day. That's not healthy, right? So um, yeah, so I like Procreate. It's like Photoshop on the iPad for drawing. I also do early digital sculpts with Nomad Sculpt. It's just a simple sculpting app on the iPad. Now I know what you're thinking. You're like, ZBrush is on iPad now, and that's fine. Like I do use ZBrush a lot, but on the iPad, I already have Nomad Sculpt. It's so easy. I just use it for the early blocking, and then I'll send it to my desktop. I have a Cintiq, like when I do the finaling, right? So, but I just kind of knock out concepts on the iPad. It's just real loose and easy. Um, okay, so back to creativity and being in a state of play. When you're painting in Photoshop or Procreate or Krita, by the way, Krita, Krita, is like a free version of Photoshop. Um, if you use layers, that's a way to not put too much pressure on yourself because you can always delete the layers. I see there's some questions in the chat. We will get to those, I promise. So yeah, layers are great. Same thing with ZBrush. I use layers, and I can be loose and free. I will say, I get bored of doing things the same way every time. So sometimes I go no layers, and I make myself like fix it. It's like having a drawing and having to erase. And you get, at least on organic sculpts, it can be cool because if you do something and you smooth it out and you do it again, you get all this like layered texture sort of. And you can get happy accidents, right? So um, yeah, it's a balance, right? You can try both ways, see what works for you. Sometimes I don't put any time constraints in my personal art, and other times I tell myself I'm going to go really fast and not get caught up in the details. I think about special effects makeup artists, on the low budget movies. Sometimes they have to come up with an idea and have it like camera ready in 24 to 48 hours. Sometimes I think about that when I'm doing my personal art. I'm like, I'm just gonna go fast and just knock it out. That helps me avoid what you call perfection paralysis. That's a real thing. I struggle with that, like finishing my personal stuff. So that's something I've been using lately. It's just like think about that profession. They have to do it fast, so I'm gonna do it fast. Now that being said, I don't. Sometimes I do personal art for enjoyment, so I don't want to rush all of it. Um, so yeah, you can think of these tips as mind tips or mind hacks. We have to get out of our own way sometimes and not self sabotage. So, speaking of self sabotage, that basically means like you're sabotaging yourself. Like maybe there's something going on. You're just afraid to finish because if you finish and it's not good, then you failed. You know, I think some of us have that. So, try. I don't necessarily have the perfect fix for that, but if you can identify what's going on, I think that's step one, right? To say, oh, I'm doing this. Um, let's talk a little bit about limiting beliefs. So, some examples of limiting beliefs are I'm not smart enough, I'm too young, I'm too old, no one will buy my products or services. Um, these beliefs limit a person's potential by creating self imposed barriers. I think imposter syndrome is another one of these. So I'd say again, first try to identify if you have any limiting beliefs. You probably do. Once you've identified the belief, you can question it. You can ask yourself, is this belief true? Um, but the thing is, if you ask what percentage are you sure, right? So if you say no one will buy my products, what percentage are you sure about that? Are you 100% sure? Probably not. Are you 50% sure? Maybe. Um, I doubt you're 100% sure no one will buy your product. So there are many things you can do to help with the limiting beliefs. I would suggest you do some research on this if you feel it's happening to you. So to wrap things up, I hope some of the information I share with you today will help you during your career search and will help you in creating your own art. Well, with some of the time I have left, I'm going to show kind of some of my art projects, and then we'll open up to questions. So let me show you a couple things real quick. So this was a I've got a bunch of screenshots as I went on this cave beast sculpture I did. So it started out here, and I'll just kind of, unfortunately, they're not all the same camera angle, but it just kind of shows it went through a lot of different uh, versions. I'm just testing different things. I'm sticking different arms on, lots of different renders. Put some people in there for scale. This was ZBrush, by the way. Supposed to be a beast that lives in a cave. That was, the cave beast. I got it out of ZBrush. I started rendering in, I think at the time this was V-Ray, but I render in Arnold now. I guess you could just say, just the great thing about sculpting is just keep going. It's going to look bad for a little bit. You just got to keep going. Yeah, so that's where it ended up. So I went from there to there. And I could add more detail too. uh, then I wanted to show, there's a baby project I made. So it's in here somewhere. Yeah, so this is my niece, the likeness of my niece. First of all, I'll say likeness is probably the hardest thing you can do as a 3D character artist, is a likeness of a person. A likeness of a kid is even harder, I found. But each time I do a project, I want to challenge myself a little. So yeah, so I have some screenshots. Some of it's a little bit random. It's just stuff that I found that I did, like I was saving reference, and I give myself notes. So let's get in here. So by the way, I updated Maya like in the middle of it, so it caused like the hair to change a little. It's just because when the updates happen in the middle of your project, so that's all that is. This is me like dropping a photo of my niece over and just like, giving myself notes and things. More plump. So yeah, by the way, this is my niece. It was a hard project because she looks different in every photo. And I didn't have a scan of her or rotating, right? So I just kind of, but again, that's kind of part of the challenge I liked when I took it on. So these are the images. She's a cute baby. She's much older now. This is just another baby I just used. Yeah, I started with pictures of heads. Front and side is always nice, right? Because you get a ton of information from that, and then you go 3/4 after that. Um, use the proportion charts. Andrew Loomis has a bunch of these. Yeah, this one helped me a lot. Kids' heads are way different than human heads, or adult heads, though, as far as proportions go. So seeing the shapes in relationship to each other. I think this is a scan of a baby. It's kind of creepy. Yeah. Uh, yeah. So this is just more notes I gave myself. Lots of rendering, lots of revisions, but I took breaks, of course, right? When you hit a wall, I'd stop, and this is basically my to-do list. When I talk about to-do lists, so that I'll write stuff down, and then like if I'm not feeling motivation, I'll go back the next day and I'll read this like, oh, here's what I gotta do, right? And then if I don't feel like it, I'll knock out the easy stuff first, and then I get momentum. Right? Um, this was the picture I was trying to match the most. Yeah. I'm gonna get through this, I promise, because I know we're gonna do questions soon. Yeah, so this was the first render. It's kind of like showing you my dirty laundry, right? Like it didn't really look right. And then it's, this is maybe a couple weeks later, and then getting closer. Bunch of ear photos, smiles, hair reference. Um, I saw this baby in like a diaper commercial, so cute. Got inspiration from other photos. I was working on the pose. Pose is like the final thing I did. And these are notes on the blanket because I rendered like a blanket, you know, um, diaper, bunch of diapers. Yeah, and then yeah, feet. I make these reference sheets, and I reuse them. Like I've got like a lot of human anatomy ones too with adults that I can reuse. I've got a feet section, a hand section, ear section, so I don't have to go to Google every time I start a new project. I've got like a reference. So yeah, and then that's where she ended up. So I think that's all I've got. I think we could do questions.